Hello, I'm Liselle Sambury. I'm a traditionally published author, and welcome to the 25 things I've learned after a year of publication. So as of last week, June 14th, that marked a year since my debut novel Blood Like Magic came out from Simon & Schuster / Margaret K. McElderry. There it is right there. There she is. So I've been a published author for a year in traditional publishing, and so I basically made a list of 25 things that I wanted to share about things that I've learned that I hope will help others or be interesting, at least for you. At the end of last year, for my debut diary series, where I was cataloging my entire year as a debut during 2021, I did a bit of a reflection at the end where I talked about some of the things that I've learned, whereas this is a lot more about things I've learned about being an author and publication in general versus kind of like about being a debut necessarily, if that makes sense. Why 25? I don't know. Originally I said 20 and then I had a few more things to say, and so I added some, and now it's 25. It's just like a good number. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so starting with number 1, which is ask for everything you want. I was given this advice early on and it blew my little baby author mind. It really did. It was really, really helpful, and I'm so thankful to that author for sharing that with me, because it made a huge difference. Because I kind of am like, well, ask within reason. I think I made a TikTok where I was like, ask within reason. And I was like, maybe don't ask for a billboard in Times Square. But I also think in some ways, as an author, you don't necessarily know what you consider reasonable or not. So honestly, ask for absolutely everything, because there were a lot of things that I wasn't sure if they were reasonable until I had asked for them. So if you want quote graphics, if you want an animated cover, if you want, them to organize your launch for you, if you want them to send books out to these 20 influencers who you have a list of, if you want them to pitch you to write a guest post on like what's a good book website. I'm like trying to think of one on like some sort of popular book blog. Ask for all of those things, because at worst they say no. That's kind of it. That's the worst. The worst is they say no. And the best is they're like, oh yeah, we could do a bunch of that. That's actually like no effort for us, or very low effort, or it's some more effort, but we're willing to do it for you for whatever reason. Whether that's we've seen your pre-orders are doing good, or whether it's you asked very nicely and we like you, whatever that be, ask and then you can see. And then you might get things that you didn't expect to get. I found that really for Blood Like Magic, that, I asked for all of these things that might not have happened had I not been like, hey, this is important to me and I'd really like to have these things. And so I do think it makes a huge difference. And when people ask me for advice as like a debut author, I'm like, that's the number one piece of advice. I'm like, ask for everything you want. Number 2, don't be afraid to employ your agent as an advocate. Your agent is there on behalf of you and to help you. And I am very much a proponent of, if you feel for whatever reason uncomfortable asking your editor or your publisher for something or telling them something, that you can ask your agent if they can do that on your behalf. I'm all on board for that, because your agent is there to support you. So yeah, absolutely ask them. I think a big one for this is for cover consultation, things like that. If you don't like your cover and you don't want to say so directly to your editor, you could say so to your agent and have that happen. Or if you've nudged your editor or your publisher about something a couple times and you don't want to nudge again, then maybe have your agent nudge instead, things like that. I don't see any problem with that. So that's just like my feeling about it, and that's what I've learned. And that's something I would definitely employ, because to me, it's better to ask something through your agent that you were uncomfortable to ask than to not ask it at all because you were uncomfortable. And so to me, like between those two things, one of those things is obviously better. Don't assume your book's performance until your book is out. Either positive or negative, either or. I find that like in this year of publication, you know, so many things can change. So many things can change over time. You can garner a readership you didn't expect, or your publisher can have promised you a bunch of things that they don't deliver. Things can really change. And so I do kind of think it's best to not assume how your book is going to do before the book has actually come out. I think that's a great way to kind of save yourself a lot of heartbreak or agony or what have you. Just kind of let, you know, see what the book does. And then when you've seen what the book does, you can see what the book does. And even then, it's not even necessarily the end, because books that, you know, come out and debut a certain way can later have things happen down the line. Like, books can pick up popularity all of a sudden and things can really change. Things like that. Or a book that was initially really popular can suddenly have a big drop. All sorts of things can happen. But I do think it's great to try and not stress yourself out from the beginning, trying to assume how your book is going to perform. Number 4, you don't have to do what everyone else is doing just because everyone else is doing it. I think this is something that in some ways I've learned the hard way, but I think sometimes something will happen and a bunch of authors will start doing a certain thing and you'll be like, should I be doing that too? And you panic and you start doing it. I think the best example of this is those Barnes & Noble sales where they're like 25% off pre-orders, and then every author is scrambling to make a pre-order graphic to be like, please pre-order my book. And I think these are great promo things, and so if you want to do it, go for it. But I also don't think you should stress yourself out being like, I absolutely have to do this, even if you don't feel like you have the capacity or like the bandwidth to do it, but you force yourself to do it anyway because everyone else is doing it, so you must have to do it. I think this can also apply to like pre-order campaigns. A lot of people do pre-order campaigns, but if your heart's not in it and you don't want to do it, I think you shouldn't do it. I personally decided not to do pre-order campaigns just because it was a very large expense, and it also felt like a lot of work to do really close to your debut coming out, and so I kind of passed on that. So it's really up to you, but yeah, essentially saying just because you see a bunch of other authors doing it doesn't mean that you absolutely have to do it. Number 5, it is your publisher's job to market your book, and any perceived failure is at the very least a shared responsibility. This is something, you know, I kind of see happening more in the background of things, in which, you know, a book will not perform the way a publisher wanted, and they will say not great things to the author about it kind of being their fault that didn't happen. And to me, that's very false. People can disagree, but to me that's very false. Your publisher is supposed to market and push your book. That is why many of us choose traditional publishing, because we don't want to be doing that ourselves. And so one of the benefits of traditional publishing is that your publisher is supposed to do that for you. And certainly nowadays, for sure, you chime in and you have your own efforts as well, but it is their job. So if they don't do it, and your book doesn't do well as a result, that's not, at the very least, shared responsibility, but certainly not only your fault. So that's something that, you know, is more of a in the background thing, but that's something I do feel strongly about and feel like people should know about. Number 6, don't burn yourself out on trying to do everything. Pick a few things that you're interested in doing and do them well. During my debut year, I feel like I had like a pretty chill experience, and I feel like it was in large part, well, because I asked for a bunch of things from my publisher and they said yes, but also the things that I decided to do, I decided to do things that I felt I had the bandwidth to do, and that would be fun and interesting for me, and I decided to do those things. And then there were a bunch of things I just like opted out of doing because it felt like too much. It honestly just felt like too much on my plate. And I think that ended up saving and helping me from burning out. And I think it's hard in this case because, of course, if you have publisher support, it's going to be a very different situation than if you have no publisher support. You might feel more inclined to burn yourself out trying to do everything because you feel like your publisher is doing nothing, and they might be doing nothing. It might not just be a feeling. And so I think it's difficult in those circumstances, but I do still feel like this is a good thing to keep in mind, to just like pick some things that you really want to do and do those. So for me, those big things are like videos. So I will do like a cover reveal video, and I'll do like a video for when my book releases, and I'll do like some like YouTube content sort of things, though I regularly do YouTube content as well. And like some other things, I'll pick and choose what I want to do, and some things I just leave behind because I just know that I don't have the bandwidth to do it. Number 7, you are allowed to say no. You can say no to things. You don't have to do everything. And in fact, sometimes you really should say no. I think especially when you're a debut author, and I think this is something, you know, in the debut group that people admitted to, is that you're so excited to have people asking you to do anything that you end up saying yes to everything. Also, I think because you're low-key worried that if you say no to something, they'll be like, never again. Never again, not for her, she says no. It's like that thing when you work in like a corporate atmosphere and you're worried that like when they ask you to do something extra and you're like no, that they write down on your progress report and they're like, doesn't take initiative. And so you have to say yes to everything, but you really don't. You really don't have to say yes to everything. There may be some things that you just find you don't like or that don't work for you. I know some people perhaps don't like to do panels or don't like to do guest posts or blog interviews or things like that, like whatever, or podcasts, whatever it is that you've done before and you just don't like it, you can say no to. Or if you are strapped for time, you don't have a lot of time and it's just like you think it's going to be overwhelming, you can say no to it. All of these things you can say no to if you want to. You do not have to say yes to everything. Number 8. Don't look at reviews unless you want to get your feelings hurt. And if you decide to look at reviews and you're a person that wants to read reviews and you do get your feelings hurt, don't lash out at people because you got your feelings hurt. That's kind of my feeling about that. I, as an author, I choose not to read reviews. Sometimes I have a weak moment and I do get my feelings hurt, and then I know it's my fault and I just like lick my wounds by myself. Sometimes I get tagged in things, but I work really hard to scroll past those and not pay attention. But yeah, and I know some people want to interact with reviews. That's your own opinion and your own thing. But I think we've seen enough authors behaving badly in reviewer spaces that it kind of feels like if you decide to look, then don't get mad at people because of what you saw. Unless, you know, what you saw is like blatant, like racism, homophobia, all, you know, blatantly problematic. That's kind of a different sort of area. But if it's just kind of like, I didn't like your book, you know, it is what it is. Number 9, find support spaces that are truly support spaces, that are not just bitch and moan spaces or complain spaces or competitive spaces. Real support spaces, they can be those things sometimes, but if they're those things all the time, it may not be the best environment. Yeah. Hello. So I know I'm in a different spot, but I didn't like the way I articulated this when I first filmed it, so I popped in here to articulate it better. So number 10, do not play the comparison game. Do not play the comparison game because it is not a game you can win. And it's very difficult to gauge within publishing, at least on your end as the author, which can be really opaque sometimes, why somebody else got something and you didn't, or why you got something and someone else didn't. It can be really difficult. And I think you can talk with other authors and you can have discussions and you can kind of suss out what might have happened and things like that, but it's also something you can't control. And I say also don't play the comparison game, especially if you are a marginalized author. I can really only speak to my experience as a Black author, but you know, there are still systemic issues in publishing. There are still issues of racism, of homophobia, of all sorts of things, where sometimes an issue of why didn't I get that and someone else do is truly discrimination, which especially is not something you can control in that case, which is not to say to ignore things or not pretend like things are happening. I think absolutely take note. I think these are things we should discuss and we should talk about, and I think discussions about this have turned out really well. So, authors, Black authors that noticed the discrepancy between advances that they got and other authors got, that was discussed, that was talked about. Publishing Paid Me came about, and that did lead to some changes in publishing. And so I do think it's important to discuss those discrepancies when you notice them and things like that. Really, it's just from an individual perspective, getting very obsessed and fixated on those things when it's kind of, in some cases it's systemic, can be really difficult. It can be really detrimental to your experience and to your mental health. And so that's why I say don't play the comparison game. But again, I don't mean don't pretend things are happening. Certainly make note of things, because these can be really important discussions that we can have as a community and as an industry to talk about these things. But yeah, I say that especially so that you understand as an author that sometimes you are not getting something just for a reason you don't know, some weird publishing thing that you just don't understand, but also sometimes for systemic reasons. And so that's kind of why I say don't play the comparison game, because it can be really, really difficult. And in some cases, when it is systemic, it's something that's like your identity and you couldn't control that anyway, and you wouldn't want to. And so yeah, that's definitely something that I learned, and I think that's difficult, and I hope that changes in the future, but for now that's kind of what I would say. But again, note it, make note of it, certainly speak on it if you want to speak on it, but try not to have it kill your spirit. Number 11, you are allowed to ask for information and should definitely, especially if you're feeling anxious or worried. So this is different to the ask for everything, because that's like, can you do this for me sort of thing. Whereas this is very much about like asking for information. So for example, if you want to know, hey, am I going to get an audiobook or am I not going to get an audiobook? Or, hey, what happened to this thing? You said you were going to pitch me to this outlet. What did they say about that? Did they say yes or did they say no? Or are we still waiting to hear back from them? Or I haven't gotten any trade reviews. Do you know when I'm going to get trade reviews? Do you think you have an idea of when that'll happen? Or what about the release date? Have we decided on a release date or not? All these questions you are allowed to ask and should ask. Don't just kind of sit in anxiety and wonder about them. If you want to ask and you would like to know those things, please let your publisher know and ask those things. I do think someone had said, it could be good to gather kind of your questions for the week and send them all at once versus kind of doing a ton of like one-off questions, which I do think is a great way to do it, but sometimes you don't think of questions at the time. So I also totally get that too. And feel free to have your agent ask again. If you feel uncomfortable with asking and you would prefer to have your agent ask for you, you can do that as well. But yeah, absolutely. It's just better to ask and know than to have you sitting there wondering. I just find that, publishers and editors, they have a lot of things on their plate, and they may not necessarily be like, oh yeah, I'll tell this to you now. But if you ask, they might have the information. It can be like, oh yeah, for sure, this is it. Number 12. Be aware of context when getting advice and take or leave what works for you. And that includes anything that I say in this video. Take or leave what works for you. But when I talk about context, I mean, sometimes people are in a different situation than you are in. And so the advice that they're giving is based on their situation and may not necessarily be relevant to your situation. For example, in the case of the pre-order campaign, someone, an author who lives in the US might be like, yeah, I did this thing and I did this thing, and then I was able to do it and it was really cheap and like, this is how much it was. Versus in Canada, our postage is more expensive. And so things like like that, which may or may not seem obvious to some people, but I do think this is sometimes something that you can forget really easily. But just like context, and even like some things of like, you know, people might be in a higher tier in publishing of their book and their title than you may be, and they might be like, oh, well, just ask your publisher to organize this for you, and you ask your publisher to organize this for you, and they're like, no. So at that point, like, that advice isn't super helpful for you. So it really depends and things like that. And like, take things that work for you and leave things that don't work for you. Number 13, you are allowed to be bitter or disappointed or upset during the process, but try not to let it overtake your entire experience. This can be hard because emotions are emotions, and like, you can say, well, try not to do this or try not to do that, but at the end of the day, your emotion is your emotion. And so if you are sad and you continue to feel sad, that's just kind of the way it's going to be. But this is something I kind of try to keep in mind with things, because sometimes things don't go the way you expected, or they don't go as planned, or something that you thought was going to happen doesn't happen, or things like that. In which case I kind of like gave myself my time to wallow and be sad, and then kind of tried to move forward and to like cling to the positive things that I had in that way, because it can really very easily overtake your entire experience. And speaking of holding on to good things, number 14 is try to hold on to the good moments. Something that I did last year that I found really, really helpful, and I continue to do it, is that I made a list of everything positive that happened about my books. So anything positive that happened during my experience, I made note of, and that way I could always look back at that. So if I was having a low moment, I could look back at that and I could be like, oh, this happened, or this happened, or this happened, and I could feel really happy about what I had accomplished thus far, and that way it kind of helped me cling to those sorts of things, which I find to be helpful. Number 15, and a lot of people say this, your front list sells your back list, meaning that your newest book helps sell your books that have come before. And so essentially the point of this in general is to not be so super focused on the one book, and the one book being everything, because sometimes the one book doesn't work out, and that's okay, and then you move on to the next book. Or sometimes the one book does really well, but then the next book doesn't really do so well, and then you get obsessed with that book. But really kind of being able to shift your focus to the next book and the next book and the next book. That is not to say that you forget everything that's happened with other books, but to not kind of pin every hope and dream on a single book. Number 16, this is incredibly practical. Make a media kit and update it regularly. So a media kit essentially has information about you as the author, so your bio, and like a photo of you that people and outlets can use, and then also information about your book. So the summary, I also put content warnings in mine. I also put if, you know, the book has like been nominated for an award or been on a fancy list, and then also the ISBN number and like all that library stuff that people might be interested in, and contacts, so contacts for your publicity, for your agent, if you have a film agent, for your film agent, for your different publishers at different publishing houses, if you have that going on, having all of that information in one kind of document. For me, I have a Google Drive folder, and I put my media kit, the PDF, and all of my like files, so my book covers and my headshots, my author photos, and I put those all in the folder, and then I give the link to the folder to people, and that way they can go and they can get all of that stuff. It also makes it really easy for me to update it, because I can like just pull out my old media kit and put in a new one, and I don't ever have to change a link. So everywhere I've put the link previously will still work for people as I update it. And so I really like doing that. And so that's nice, because, you know, sometimes people will be like, oh, well, where's your bio and your social media links and your book information and all this stuff, and then you can just send them a link to that instead of having to like scramble to pull all that stuff up all the time. And number 17 off the back of that, I also have a text file where I have my bio, a short blurb of my book, and all my social media links as well, just in case someone asks for them, and it's just easier for me to go in and copy and paste all of that text and then just send it to them. So I also have that as well as the media kit, just because sometimes people are like, just give us a couple of your social media links, and then it's just easier to copy and paste it that way than for me to use the media kit. And so I'll do it that way instead. So having that I also find to be very handy. Some people also do the media kits, while I'm already on this topic, some people also do the media kits, they just have it as a page on their website. They just have a page with all of that information instead of doing like a separate file or a Google file or whatever have you. Number 18, pre-orders do matter. They do matter. That's why you see all of us shouting about pre-orders all the time, because they do matter quite a bit. A lot of people talk about pre-orders. They talk about them for listings, so getting on like the New York Times bestseller list or the indie bestseller list, and that's great. But quite honestly, it's not going to happen for most of us. Most of us are not going to get on that list. To me, the other strength of pre-orders is that pre-orders tell your publisher that people are interested in your book. And so if you're getting a lot more pre-orders than your publisher expected, they might be more inclined to do more things for your book. And it would be great, of course, if your publisher just always did all those things for you before seeing any of that stuff. But sometimes having those numbers can kind of be a push for your publisher to show, hey, my book is like doing pretty well and people are really interested in it, so like maybe we should do more stuff. And to me, for a mid-list author that is probably not going to hit any of those bestseller lists, that's a much more important sort of push. And of course it's sales. They're sales. So sales are always great. But to me, that's really like the strength for the most part of the pre-order. And so I do think it is worth it to at some point be like, hey, can you pre-order my book? And like to express the importance of pre-orders to people around you, because it does help and it is important. I don't think you have to get super, super obsessed, because you can only do so much. You can only do what you can do. But I do think it is worth pushing the pre-order. Number 19, take advantage of your debut group. And by that, I don't mean like take advantage in a bad way. I mean, interact with your debut group, get to know people, talk to other people. It's also great because if, you know, for example, you wanted to do a panel or you were doing your launch and you didn't really know who to do it with, you can go into your debut group and kind of be like, hey, does anyone want to do this event with me or this launch with me or something like that. It's a great space of people that are in the same boat as you, who can also, you can help each other out and promote each other and things like that. I don't think you need to be obsessively in the group. I know for some people, those groups, it can be a lot of stuff to keep up with and they find it difficult to keep up with in their everyday life. And I think that's totally fine. I just think it's a great resource. Even if you just have a question and you just pop in every once in a while to ask a question, because sometimes, you know, you can ask a question to your publisher, but what you really want is you want to feel from what other authors are experiencing. And so then it's nice to pop in there and to ask your question there and to get that feedback. Number 20 is to prioritize writing. And I will say with the caveat that I'm aware that this could be very easy for me to say as someone who writes full time. I have the privilege of doing that, and that makes it a very different circumstance for me. But what I mean when I say prioritize writing is, I mean, don't let marketing and promo overtake the work. And again, I know this can be hard because if your book is coming out and you're really wanting it to do well and you're trying to do as much as possible to help with that, you know, it might be difficult for you to also balance writing with that when you are trying to promote your book. But to me, I find it to be really, really helpful to prioritize writing, because at the end of the day, to continue to write full time and to be in traditional publishing, I do have to continue to write books. And so that has to be my number one priority. And marketing and promo and what have you has to be secondary, because at the end of the day, I need to write the books. I need to write the books. And it's more helpful to me to spend the time writing the books than to spend the time doing a bunch of marketing and promo, which is why I have all those things I learned about, you know, picking and choosing the promo know that is important to me and that I care a lot about, and doing that in those pockets than like trying to do everything, because trying to do everything would make it really difficult for me to prioritize writing the way I want to. And so yeah, it's kind of that's something that I learned, and it might just be a personal thing. It might just, well, all of these are really personal things. These are things that I learned and things that work for me. But yeah, I just find prioritizing writing has really been the most helpful thing, especially in terms of concentration, because, you know, marketing and promo, like, I don't ever know if that's working. I never have any idea if that's working, because social media likes do not buys indicate. So just because somebody's liking my post doesn't mean that they're going out and buying my book. So it's really difficult for me to know if that's working, versus like if I finish a draft, I finished a draft. Like, that is progress, that is working, it's happening. And I continue to have things to work on that are contracted, or things to sell or whatnot. And so for me, prioritizing writing, absolutely. Number 21, protect your peace. So by this I mean boundaries. Create your own boundaries that you need as a person. So for me, that meant I closed my DMs on all of my social media, so only people I follow can DM me. And then I had to unfollow some people because I only really wanted to be following people who I would be comfortable having access to my DMs. That doesn't mean I like know everybody super well or anything like that. But also it just means that like if I really know almost nothing about someone, it's hard for me to follow them. Or if I feel like there's a weird power imbalance thing, as in the case of teenagers, I won't follow that person because I don't want them to have access to my DMs. And that's just something that works for me and was an important boundary for me. And readers can still contact me. If readers want to interact with me, they have all the public spaces to interact with me. They can comment on my videos, they can comment on my Instagram photos, they can comment or tweet at me or mention me or what have you. I still have all of those avenues to still interact with readers. And I mention that because sometimes people say, oh, I don't want to close my DMs because then how can I interact with readers? And to me, I'm like, I still can interact with readers, and I have events and panels and Instagram lives and all of these things where people can come and interact and ask me questions and all of those things. So I'm available to my readership. I'm just not available in that super private DM way, because just for my comfort level, it wasn't really what I wanted. And so for me, that's part of protecting my peace and protecting my, privacy in that way. And I actually find that like I am quite open in many different avenues, on YouTube and things like that. I'm very, very accessible in that way. And so I don't feel that I need to be accessible in every way. And I think that should be something authors think about as well. Like, how accessible do you want to be? And you don't need to be accessible in every single way. In this same vein, some people will also block tagging. So especially for authors, because they might be tagged in a bunch of negative reviews, some people will block tagging to this effect as well. I don't. I still have my tagging on because it's been fine. If I see anything rating a review, I scroll past it. But that's also something you can do if you want to do that. I also don't block tagging because I know that can be a way for other readers to find me and for promotions and things like that. So that's a reason I don't like to block tagging, and I just take care when I'm looking through things I've been tagged in. Number 22. This was definitely a learning for me, which was ask for your first week sales and then wait for your royalty statement, because obsessively checking your sales tracker, your sales data is not necessarily helpful, and is often inaccurate. So there are things like certain publishers will have sales portals. So Simon & Schuster has one. I believe HarperCollins also has one. And then there's also things like BookScan, which you can use to try and check your sales numbers as well. And so some people will look at all of these so that they can see how their sales were doing. I was one of those people that was obsessively looking every week, and I was always on there. I was always checking. I was trying to see what the sales were. And it was just kind of like, once I got my royalty statement, it was so different. In a positive way, it was much higher, but it was so different from what I was seeing in the sales portal anyway. And it just kind of felt like, what was I really doing looking all the time? And like many times I looked and I was like, oh, womp womp. And I didn't feel great after. And I was like, what is the point of this? What is this doing for me? And so I do think, you know, to each their own, but I do think it's better to like ask for those first week sales, because those are the, you know, usually the most important sales for your book. So those can give you an idea of how you're doing. And then wait for your royalty statement, because that'll be the most accurate. It'll have all that information. If you must, maybe at like a 3-month mark or something like that. But I don't think there's a great benefit to looking week after week after week. I think it just like creates stress, and it's better to just look at the first week and then wait for those royalty statements. 3. This is less a learning, but I do think while I'm in here and I'm talking about things about like authors and things that maybe authors should know, this feels like one to mention, and it's that accessibility is important. So for me, I'm not perfect. I learn stuff all the time. I'm trying my best to do what I can do, and I try and learn as I can, and to, you know, make sure that my content is accessible as possible within my vein of knowledge. And so I do think it's important to consider these things. So, you know, when you're making videos, adding subtitles, if there are words spoken, things like that, adding a video description in text format or an image description in text format. On Instagram, you can either put it in your caption, but there's also an accessibility option in Instagram where you can like go, like when you're posting, you can just kind of attach it to the image that way. If your like caption is going to be really long and you don't want the image description to be in the caption, you can put it there instead, things like that. And correcting your captions. So if you have videos, like going in there to correct the captions, if there's an auto caption feature, and like making sure your captions are correct. I find this especially, I don't know if I just like, maybe I just don't understand the TikTok captions, but like anytime whenever I watch TikToks, the captions are so often wrong. They're so often wrong. And so it's great if you can go in and like shift those, or just like for me, I use a program called CapCut. It's an app. I will link it down below. And I just add my captions myself through that, because I know how to edit that. And then when I like put stuff up on TikTok, then I can put captions in that way. And yeah, just like trying to make stuff accessible however you can. Number 24, this is also very practical, and again seems obvious, but everybody always says it, which makes me think that it's perhaps not obvious to everyone. But put your taxes aside and do not touch them. And I would highly, highly recommend hiring an accountant. So when I first did this, I had some sticker shock. I was like, oh my God, that much money? But the accountant got me back all that money and then some. And like me doing it myself, I wouldn't have been able to do everything right. I might have made mistakes. You make mistakes, you might owe more money than you thought and then have to deal with that. And like your accountant can get you a bunch of deductions that you might not be aware of as an author. And so then you can save extra money in different places. I find it to be really worthwhile to get an accountant. Incorporating is a separate thing altogether. That is something you need to talk about with someone that has financials. I had previously gotten the advice about incorporating, and then I realized it was very different in Canada. It was a whole different thing. The person that had said it was in the US. This is where that advice comes out about like context of where you're getting advice from, and it wasn't super relevant for me, and so I am not incorporated at the moment. I might be in the future, but I'm not at the moment, and so it's a whole other thing. But at baseline, don't spend your tax money. Please put it aside and highly consider getting an accountant. One specifically that has worked with authors before. So something you can do, again, the strength of a debut group, but you can also find authors that just kind of live in your area and just kind of reach out and ask them if they use an accountant and who they use, because then at least that accountant has worked with an author and they know how author taxes and deductions and all that stuff and how you get paid up by your publisher, etc., etc. And they know all that information. So then you can get someone that has all of that instead of getting an accountant that maybe isn't familiar with that and might be missing out on doing a bunch of stuff for you just because they don't know. And finally, number 25, set your own markers for success. Set your own markers for success. Because in publishing, in traditional publishing, there are these huge markers for success. And I did talk about this in a TikTok, but you know, like hitting the New York Times bestseller list and like hitting the indie bestseller list and getting a film or a TV deal and having a billboard in Times Square. And like there's some really huge, amazing things that are such huge, wonderful markers for success, but they are not applicable to the vast majority of authors. They often only happen for a small amount of authors. And so marking your success as an author by that can in a lot of cases really lead to heartbreak. And so I do think it's important to create your own markers for success. You know, write down a list of things that you would love to accomplish and include things that you know you can accomplish that are within your control, so that those are things that you can look back at and be on like, I did that. I did do that. That is correct. That was something I wanted to do. That was something I knew that I could do, and I did it. And then have different kind of stages of markers of success, all sorts of different things, so that you're not only pinning your success as an author on something that is very, very limited to a small amount of people within the industry. And so that's kind of, yeah, definitely something I learned. It's definitely something that helped me. I have my little author bucket list, and I have a ton of things on there. I have all sorts of things on there. And of course I have those big things on there, like hitting the New York Times bestseller list. But I also have things like, you know, visiting my book in a bookstore and like having somebody say that a teen loved my book and like all of those sorts of things. So like have all sorts of different markers in there. I think I also had just like finishing my book or like handing in my book or things like that. So you have all sorts of different markers. So that's the last thing I would say. And that's it for this video. I hope those things were helpful for you. I think it's definitely been a big learning process for me in like having my book published, and I'm continuing to learn things all of the time. There's many more things to learn. I still feel like I'm a baby author, even though I'm not a debut anymore, and I've got different books on the horizon and things like that, just because it feels so fresh and new. But I learned a lot of stuff, so I was happy to be able to share that with all of you. And yeah, being an author is a whole thing, but it's really exciting, and I'm obviously really happy to be an author and to have achieved this dream of mine. And I remember back in the day I was like, man, I can't wait until my book is published and it's just out. Things are gonna be so much better. And you know what? I was right. I was very right. It's really nice to just already have the book out and have one book that I can always kind of be like, oh, you can check out this book and this is the book I have. And so it's really fun and amazing to be like, oh, that book has been out for over a year now and it's still going. It's still there. Paperback's gonna come out soon. Box set's gonna come out. And so it's all very exciting. And the sequel, of course. So yeah, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!